Our next learning moment is about responsiveness. Now, uh, Bootstrap itself is amazingly great at being responsive right from the get go. But one of the things we've all noticed is HTML tables, right? People love them for showing data because you can scan across columns and up and down rows and so on and so forth. But they just don't usually work very well on a smaller screen size, right? Now, I'll maybe mention I've seen a couple of students in different groups taking the approach of reducing the number of columns dynamically on for smaller screens and putting more data into like a collapsible div somewhere or something like that. Great idea. I love the idea. It's a good approach. I'm just going to share an alternate approach with you today. I'm not saying it's any better or different. Well, it's different, obviously. But what I'm going to suggest is that we can switch what's visible, okay, using the display property in Bootstrap. So what this does is it determines, what is visible at different screen sizes or resolutions, right? We have extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, and so on, right? So the instructions are all here. You can just go through. It's a little different from the earlier approaches on with hidden and so on, but it does make sense and it's easy to follow and figure out once you get used to it, right? So it's pretty easy to show and hide things depending on the screen size. That's the point. So along with that, what I'm going to suggest is to use on a smaller screen, so large and larger. I'm going to use the standard HTML table as we've been doing. But for smaller screens, anything under large, although you could play around with this, medium if you want, and so on and so forth, I'm going to switch to showing a card deck, right? But conceptually, it's very similar in the sense that in a table, every row represents a record, right? In my card deck, every card represents one record, right? Now, the one thing we do definitely lose is column headings that we found convenient for indicate sorting. But I'll show you a way that you can just use like a drop-down list to choose sort order as an alternative approach to get around that one limitation. So anyway, have a look at this, see if you like it, see if you think it works for you and your client, and we'll just go through one demo using the index page of our patients, right? So let's just say here, just to make it a little more challenging, client wants the expected yearly visit estimate to be on the index as well, right? So that's the first change we'll make. So what I have done, I've downloaded the last version from lesson 8, okay, learning moment 8, where we added our aggregates and so on with link queries. So I have the same copy as we left off there, and we're just going to go through and work on the patient index. Okay, so here we go. Now, one thing that complicates our life, it made it easy in some ways, but harder in others, is the fact that we have count them, three different versions of the index page, right? This was mainly done for security, right? So that we could, instead of having a whole bunch of ifs inside of our code, decide, depending on the security role a user is in, show them a different version of the index page. The downside is if we make changes to the design of the actual page, then we have to make sure we do it in all three. Or because the changes are fairly significant this time around, I would probably just make the changes in the admin pages and make new fresh copies of each and just remove the links as necessary from the other different versions. Okay, anyway, I'll just focus on the index admin. I just want to make sure you understand that you have to repeat the process basically for the others. Okay, so the first thing was our client has said, no, no, I really want to see that right on the index. So we'll have to just add that into the table here, right? So I'll just basically, maybe I'll put it right after age. We'll copy, do a little copy paste here, and we'll have visits per year, something like that, right? It will be an action button so we can sort by it. And away we go. So down here, right after age, then we'll just throw the actual display of that column of data. Oh, there we go. So instead of age, though, of course, we're going to be showing our expected yearly visits. All right, so that handles the display on the page. Now, of course, to be able to sort by it, we do have to do a little bit of work back in the controller. So going to the patients controller, way down in the index action here where we applied our different sorts. Once we knew what we wanted to sort by, right, I'll maybe put it right at the very top. Or now we know which field to sort by, right? So I'll throw in one here for the expected yearly visits. Make sure that you, of course, have else if structures on the go here, right? Because we want to make sure that once we're done the one sort, we don't consider doing any more. Okay, so if it's visits per year, right, then we'll sort the one way or descending depending on the order that we're currently using. All right, so those are the changes that we're asked to do. So I'm just going to run it quickly here. So this is what we end up seeing on the screen, right? So we have our age, visits per year, and I can sort back and forth, right? Maybe I'll just change my page size here to see my 4 big records all at once. So you see, I also took some time to just load some pictures in as well for the patients, right? But we can sort by age, we can sort by this, that, the other thing, and away we go. It looks good, it looks fine, except of course on a smaller screen size, pretty soon it gets down to the point where you can't see it all. You got to scroll left and right. And you know what? Scrolling left and right is usually not considered a very good UI design for a small screen, a smartphone, things like that. And of course, sometimes it's much worse in terms of the numbers and the text getting wrapped around and so on. So that's why we want to think about some alternate ways to display the data. All right. Pardon me. So what we're going to do then is we're going to follow along in our little copy paste file here with some of the suggestions that I have. So what I'm going to basically do is right at the beginning, so we have that in there. What we're going to do is come to the index admin, go right to the top of the table, right? So here we're just going to use some of the display properties that are built in to Bootstrap itself. So basically you start with the smallest screen size and you work your way up. So starting from the smallest, we're going to say, nope, there's no display. And as we go up each size, ooh, when we reach large, okay, now we're going to use block display and basically show the table, right? If I do Control F5 and bring this up, okay, by the way, I cheated. I commented out the authorized tag so I don't have to worry about logging in. And I made sure that the view being returned was always the one I'm working on here, the admin version of the view. Okay. Um, all right, so as I shrink this down, ooh, look at that, see? Once we get anywhere below large, the table just disappears. Boom, like that. All right. So yeah, it's manageable more or less to that degree, but below that, I think it's just too much data to show in a table. So what we're going to do is we're going to substitute something else instead, right? So above or below, it doesn't really matter which. I'm going to start by just putting a div in place that instead, okay, starts off not visible, okay, from the smallest size as block, but then once we reach large, oh, I'm sorry, uh, it starts off visible in block, but once we reach large, the display is none, right? So that will be the opposite of this arrangement. So basically, it'll toggle back and forth between these two as to which is actually visible. So inside this new div is where I'm going to put my card deck, right? So I have a card deck wrapper around a card deck. And see, that allows me to then have the cards sort of dealt across the screen from left to right. When it runs out of room, starts a new row of cards, right? So quite responsive in design. When it gets narrow enough, you just have a vertical, right, display of all the cards. So here's our for each loop. Remember, our model for this index is a IEnumerable collection of patient objects, right? So each item as we loop through will be an individual patient, just like we have it down in the table itself. So what's going to be on the actual card? Well, I'm starting off with a simple version. Okay, so each card, right? So we have a class that's a card, and then we have a card header, and there I have a nice big H5, okay, nice big patient name showing. Then we get into the card body, so I have a paragraph that is card text, and I'm just using some BRs here to break it up into the age, expected visits, doctor, medical trials, and so on, right? That will just show the basic data, right? And then our cards have footers, which is a great place to put things like our links for edit, details, delete, and so on, right? So just seeing that as it is, let me just save this and go back to our page, if I refresh now, there we go. So there are my cards, okay? And you see how the card deck works. Now, of course, if I allowed it to be visible to even larger screens, I would have probably had room for 3 across, right? Maybe even 4 across before I start on the next row of cards in my card deck. But when I get down to a narrower screen, right, then I strictly have just a vertical arrangement of cards. All right, so that's a step in the right direction. Each one represents like a row of data in the table or a single patient, right? Okay, so that's good enough for now, but you know what? There's more data that's required. And besides, we have that nice picture, and of course, we have our little pop-up and so on. So I'm going to just add those features in. So I'm just going to replace the entire for each body here with my next version. And all it really has is the added data that was missing, including the picture. Most of the code for this is right off of our other pages, right? In fact, some of it is down below further in the same page, right? So here's in the card body, I'll have my media element so I can show the patient photo. Notice I have my else here that if there is no photo for the patient, just to keep a consistent look to the layout of the cards, I'll just use my blank profile JPEG here, same size image. Remember, of course, this was a thumbnail, so we've already shrunk the image down. It is exactly the size that we're showing it. It's not going to be modified in any way, so that gives us pretty good efficiency, even though we're showing the pictures, right? Okay, and then beside the picture in the media body, then we'll have all of our data showing there, including I threw in, this is of course exact same code as further down in the table where we make our pop-up with the list of all the medical conditions, right? So that's good, right? So, and really, we're almost done. Okay, let me actually run it again now. So we have 2 different display modes, you might say. Okay, so if I go to patients, now I have my nice cards, right? Ooh, I like to throw in a blank space, a bit of white space between the filter button here, but we'll get to that in a second. And of course, as we get wider, we'll get more cards showing up, and eventually it switches back to the table for a full screen view, right? So our filter and search will work the same, whether we're looking at cards or not, okay? Now let me just prove that to you here. If I go back down, so we're seeing cards, I can search by Gregory House or Doogie Howser filter, right? And I just see the one patient here for Doogie House. I don't have a lot of data, right? And there's the 2 for Gregory House and so on. So that's good. You know, our filters are still working, but one thing that's obviously missing are column headings to click and do sorting, right? So that's a big issue. Now, before I forget, when we come back up here, it's bugging me. I forgot to put in, I normally do, just inside, because I don't want it visible there when we're using the table, right? I'll just throw in a little BR to give me some extra white space above the card deck. Okay, so I'm happy with this basically, but filtering, right? So as noted in my copy paste file, when we get down so far and we say, okay, now filter, right? What we need to do is add sorting for small screens. And I'm going to do that by giving you a drop-down list with the same options for sorting as you normally see across as column headings, right? But at the same time, another thing that comes up as an issue on small screens, I've always preferred, if there's anything to filter by, to have the filter collapse div open. So you can, at a glance, be aware that there's a filter applied, A, and B, see what the actual filter is, right? On a small screen, it's really not that practical. And maybe I will run it once more, check I have my BR in the right place, and show you what I'm talking about here. Pardon me, I don't have COVID, I promise. Okay, there, that looks better there. Um, so, yeah, we have our BR, but what I was referring to is the filter search, okay? If we have that open, because I have a filter in place, on a small screen, gosh, on a smartphone, that takes up almost all the screen, right, before you get to see any data. So I would prefer to somehow indicate, usually I use a color or something on this button to indicate that there is a filter being applied, right? And if that's the case, then I know right away there's a filter. I can click the button and see what the filter is, right? But it doesn't take up the whole screen at the top of the page, so to speak, all the time. So we're going to incorporate that change at the same time that we're going to add in here another drop-down list for doing sorting. Now, the tricky part there is, of course, is not only choosing which property to sort by, age, name, whatever. There's also whether you're going to do ascending or descending. So have a look at how we're going to do that in just a second. All right. So basically the changes I need to make here, it's a few little ones. Right now I was using this. In the collapse, we were passing either the word show or an empty string to decide if it should stay open because we are currently filtering. Well, I'm going to take that out altogether because I'm going to let it collapse unless the user wants to see what's inside here, right? And instead, uh, basically, I'm going to put it inside of our button. So instead of having this here, I will be supplying a value into the class for the button itself, right? And while we do that as well, I'm going to modify what text is displayed. So I don't mess it up, I'm replacing the whole button. But really, instead of just filter search, I also want to mention sort, okay, when I'm on a small screen as well. So I'm just, doing some inline work here and showing certain text in different stages, right? So that's the basic thing there. Okay, so now inside of the card itself, right, I'm going to add before the row where I start all my normal inputs here, I'm going to add another div that will again only be visible on small screens, right? So it starts off block, but once we get to large, there's no display for large and above, right? So it's a form group, I have an input group, and here's how I'm handling two things with one, right? That I actually have a checkbox for ascending versus descending, right? And then right beside that or incorporated into the input group is my drop-down list, my select for the sort field. Now I'm calling it sort field ID. We're used to using ID in the names for select lists, right? So there we go. Now, one other change I should make before I forget, down here at the bottom, filter is kind of a keyword we look for, so I don't want to use that. And besides, now this is not just filtering, so I'm just going to say apply. So you click the button to apply, whether it's a filter or a sort or a change of any of those, we apply it, right? Okay, so that's basically it for the view. That's all we really have to change here, right? Now let's get into the actual controller itself and see how we work with those changes that we just made. By the way, in my copy paste file, I also have sort of complete versions of each of these. So if you missed a step or had problem with copy paste, you can just replace the whole thing. All right. So coming back to the index action here, I do need some new parameters, right? Because I have my drop-down list and my checkbox. Okay. So I'll just add some parameters to go along with those. See, we need the drop-down list in addition to the column headings for sorting because it might be one or it might be the other, right? So we'll add our sort direction check box and our sort field ID from our drop-down list, right? Now I'm going to switch the approach a little bit. Instead of just checking for the word filter versus a column heading, I'm going to, because now I have these field names coming from multiple locations, I'm going to check for that using an array of allowed values, so to speak, right? So I'm just going to make some more white space here. And then here I'm going to throw in a string array of the options I want to have for doing sorting. Patient, age, doctor, and visits per year, right? And I'll be able to use that. I can check if something is contained in here, and I can also use it to help create the select list for my dropdown itself, right? Okay, now, remember we made changes to this whole business of passing the filtering in the view bag to know whether or not we were going to collapse, right? So instead, I'm going to actually show, um, put in text that will control the class of the button, right? So I switched it to secondary instead of primary. I just felt that looked better. So it's just an outline under normal conditions if we aren't filtering, right? And to go along with that, what we did in the past down here is every time we test if there's something to filter by, if there was, then we would set filtering to show to expand the collapsible div. So instead, because I'm using this as a class for a button, I will just set it to a nice bright red, right? By setting it equal to button danger, right? So I do that in each one, and I missed one up top here. So if I filter by any one of these, then my button will now be red, allowing the div to collapse and letting the user actually see that there is a filter just by the bright color of the button itself. Okay, so what we have to do is this if block that currently works fine for just the column headings, but is not enough now because we have to be checking for multiple ways of indicating sorting. So I'm going to basically replace it with the code from my copy paste file, right? So I'm just come over and grab that. Instead of just an if, we have an else if, an if else as well. So the logic is just a little bit different. We check again for an action button, right? And then we know that we have to consider sorting. Reset the page to 1. And here's my list, right? My array of possible sort options. So if the action button matches any one of them, then I know someone clicked a column heading because they were working on a larger screen and they want to sort. So the same logic we've done in the past works fine here. Else, okay, we have to check if the if we're asked for sorting, but it wasn't from a column heading, then we know it was from our drop-down list, right? So I get the sort direction, okay, from my checkbox. Now with a checkbox, of course, if we don't have it checked, then we get no information. So I can check if null or empty, all right, and I know that that's the one value, so I can toggle back and forth here. And then the sort field ID will just be the actual value, like same as the column heading. Okay, so that's basically my new structure here. Now, what I've also thrown in is I thought, you know what, if I've set a sort order and I go away, I know we have our now that if I click the correct button to come back to the page, it will maintain that because we're putting everything into get requests, right? But if I'm all over the place in my application in other areas and come back here, it seemed to me it might be nice to stick that into a cookie what the sort direction is. So it's maintained until I ever want to change it, at least for the next 30 minutes, right? So I'm storing those values into a cookie here, right? Now our else branch, coming back to the page. So here we're coming to the page. We didn't press any buttons. So it might have been a long time since we were here. So we check if there's a cookie for the sort order. If there is, then I set it from the cookie. So that's what the else branch is for, right? Okay, so now we come down to where we actually do the sorting depending on the options that were chosen. And that's good all the way down through. We don't have to change any of that. But down here, here's where we store into the view data the last used sort field and sort direction. And that sort field might come from our drop-down list or from a column heading, doesn't matter. At this point, it's consolidated together. But it's a perfect spot then to create our select list for the new drop-down that we show. It's a perfect spot because by now we know the sort field, and so we can actually use that to make sure it's properly selected in the drop-down list before we display it. Okay, and that basically should be fine. That should be all that we have to change here. So let me just give her another run. Once more, I'll just mention that the whole thing is in the actual copy paste file. So if you messed it up at all, you should be able to use it. So now, okay, here's my new sort by, right? Now you notice that as we go larger and get back to the table, that disappears. We still have this collapsible div here, but we're no longer showing that drop-down list, right? Because we have the column headings instead. So if I click age, so now I'm going in ascending order by age. Watch this. If I shrink down now, eh, my mouse is stuck on the edge of the mouse pad. There we go. Oh, see? Ascending by age, right? If I go descending, there we go. So now the oldest, age 101, is at the top, 65, 57, 56, right? So it is working, and I can navigate away and come back, and my sort order will be the same. So I can change both at once. I can change to ascending order by expected yearly visits, right? So 2 to 6. Oh, I only have, oh, okay, sorry. I just missed one. Yeah, they're almost all the same. That's not very exciting, but 6 is at the end because it's in ascending order. If I put that back to descending, then Fred should come to the top, right? Okay, so you see it's working. Okay, we have our sorting, we have our filters that we can apply. This always goes away, but if I'm applying a filter, then I get a nice red button to let me know, hey, there is a filter on the go here, right? So you might not be seeing all the data. What's the filter? We'll just expand it and you can see what the current filter is, right? I can go back to all conditions and then now it clears. The sort doesn't affect the color of the button because, hey, we always have some sort order on the go, right? Just now it's kind of nice that you can actually use this to see what the current sort order is, whereas before you kind of had to look at and interpret the data to know for sure. So, I think that's kind of a bonus feature at the very least. So I can go back to patient in ascending order, and there we go. So Jane Doe is at the beginning, Barney Rubble are at the end of the alphabet, shows up last. All right, so it's up to you if you like that approach using the card deck, right? Or it switches back to the table as you need or want it to, right? And you can decide at what point you want it to switch. Maybe you're happy with your table right down to a medium, and you may want to switch to the card deck, for small and extra small. It's entirely up to you, and it's just an option on how you can set it up. Okay, so don't forget you got to update the pages for the other two as well, and I hope you enjoy.